Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. Everything is good over here. And if today you hear a little bit more noise, it's because I'm doing this interview in the middle of the day and all my animals are out and about. That means if you hear a rooster crowing or my guineas, their noise, and I've got exotic bird. In other words, usually when I do these interviews in the evening, it's a little bit more quieter because sometimes, animals are like kids. Their timing is impeccable. But yeah, so if you hear weird noise, that's where it's coming from. But anyway, again, I'm going to confirm I'm going to do my Halloween show. And yeah, everything on here is, people were asking me about my pigeons. Yes, my pigeon babies are doing great. Because for those of you who missed out, besides my exotic birds, I'm now breeding racing pigeons. Now, these are the ones that you enter what they call derbies, things like that. And I had 2 pairs of pedigreed pigeon couples. I bought them all separately. I looked at their lineage. Like I explained, this is very important in pigeon world. That means something, But anyway, and one couple, because they laid 2 eggs. I don't know what happened. The eggs didn't go, but they already got another 2 eggs. But the other couple, they're 2 eggs, and they got babies. They got babies, and I'm very happy about that. Let me see if I can. I'm like, how's that? I said, not that bad, but you know how you talk about people like, oh, my grandchildren. That's like, oh, I've got pictures of my baby pigeons, all the other chicks. Let me see if I can get them up here. But it's funny because let me tell you something. When you're breeding animals, you get all excited. I've spoken to other breeders and they're looking at me like, calm down. It's like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is very important. It's that kind of deal. Yeah, you get all excited because let me tell you something. Down the road, besides, I'm gonna be racing them. I have plans to sell some of them because, like I said, I really put a lot of effort, thought, and money into the quality of the pigeons. Like I said, a lot of them. Like I've had to immerse myself in this. It's like if you get pigeons out of the Netherlands and Germany, and of course, some of them produce or out of certain lofts that are known to produce winners. And believe it or not, a few years back there was I can't remember the name of the pigeon, Marlene. It was purchased for $1 million by a Japanese gentleman from the owner of the pigeon. $1 million. And this is the thing, this would be just for breeding purposes, because once that pigeon races, it's trained to always return to that same location. In other words, you can't use it in another race because in its brain, the circuitry is to go to that one spot. So in other words, when they purchase these pigeons that perform really, really well, it's strictly for breeding purposes. In the sense of, it's like an investment. How's this? Because
if you could say, I have chicks that were bred out of this, how do you want to call it? Out of this parent, and of course, obviously, if you've got a great parent, in other words, you're going to try to get the other parent to be of equal, superiority. I mean, tasting a lot of money, even when you could say this pigeon is even the grandparent. Because mostly they go back like 3 generations on the lineage, on the pedigree. But yeah, when I read that, $1 million, I'd be like, whoa, what? It's like, okay, but. And of course, there are, and I said it before, some of these different derbies that they have around the country and around the world, by the way, some of them are, the payouts are in the thousands or $1 million. For, they have, of course, the winner and of course, like the different placements. And how they do it, of course, is they have a GPS, not a GPS, it's like something that they put on their legs, like a band that basically times them, like a racehorse that goes across the finish line. That kind of deal where because it could mean the seconds. In other words, how hey, that horse won by a nose. That kind of thing is really important because that means, maybe a second could be worth $1 million. How's that? Let me see if I can. Let's see. Yeah, but yes, let me see. I'm trying to get a picture of my. Oh, come on! This is going to take too long. I'll show it to you guys later. But anyway, yeah, that's in other words, and that's got me. I know that I kind of overdo it when I get into something new, because not that I'm a perfectionist, but when once you get used to doing something and you know what you're doing, you don't overthink it. But I'm not there yet, and I'm afraid of making, like, I remember when the chicks were born, one was bigger than the other. It was like one was a baby Huey and the other one was a little bit smaller. And I called this guy that I know him, I call him the Pigeon Master. And I called him up and I said, hey, I've got one chick that's really big and the other one's small. Is that normal? He goes, yeah. That happens. They'll even out. He says, but for some reason, that's really common. And I was like, you sure? And I'm like, yes, there's nothing wrong. Because I'm like, okay, I've got a runt. All right, out the bat, I got a runt. Which, by the way, runts sometimes can surprise you. Let me see. Oh my God, Marlene. All I've got is pictures of their, wait. Let me see. I've got this as their, let me see if I can, okay, here. These are the babies just born, as you can tell right there. And they're like little, and by the way, they're ugly. They're cute. They're so ugly, they're cute. How's that? They're so ugly, they're cute. But anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is, who is the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural? He's been here before. He's fantastic. He's a great storyteller. His name is Steve E. Asher. He's a folklorist, a researcher of the paranormal, musician, and an amateur historian. He's a 10-year veteran of both corrections and law enforcement. Although being born in Western Kentucky, he has traveled the world, including Thailand, to study lore and ghost culture. He's an advocate for people with special needs and hosts the House of Asher podcast. He's also the author of Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, The Great Mud Flood, The Thing That We All Forgot, Hauntings of the Saint Vincent Academy, More Curious Counties from Kentucky, Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum, Short Stories for Darker Nights by the Master's Command, True Stories of Possession, Superstitions and Rituals, and Deathly Lore. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Steve?
Doing pretty well. You were talking about the whole situation with your birds and all that.
Yeah.
I think what you were, I may not have the same thing, but I believe it's an RFID tag.
Maybe that's it, yeah.
Mm-hmm, which they've been doing that, like the concept of raising pigeons. It's weird that we both were talking about this, but started at least like 220 AD.
Well, it's
and
like,
of course, you look at every old school military thing, every, movie with a king or something, give them, here, let's put the message on into the little thing that's strapped to their leg and send them back and forth.
Right.
That happened all the time in warfare, and that's still a big thing. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I won't get down this subject too long, but I was, if us being, older folks, because I'm 54 now, if we all had that, and we wrote all our messages in cursive, people wouldn't be able to read it in another 5 or 10 years because they've stopped teaching cursive in school.
I know,
so.
I know, I know. I write stuff in cursive. I know exactly what you mean. Cursive is not a thing. And I remember, by the time I was in second grade, I was getting, I was learning cursive in school. So yeah, that'll be the what was it that they were in World War II, that they were using the Navajo language to basically get messages through so that nobody would understand it. Eventually we can write in cursive and it'll be the new the indecipherable stuff, whatever.
Thanks. Yeah, and they used that World War II.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, it was in World War II that they needed, in other words, they knew that they couldn't figure out the Navajo language, so I think they were called wind talkers, I believe. And this was how they were and they couldn't figure out, the enemy couldn't figure out how to decipher it, because of course it was a Native American language.
Well, and it's so funny that, or maybe funny, but strange that there was it's like, okay, this was a marginalized culture, like we more or less try to kill all these people off. And now it's like, but it was funny, most of these guys that were on this were super patriotic, even though they're not, blind to the situation, of other people's plight.
Yeah.
But that's what it's about at the end of the day, and I'm not going to try not to get too political with it. We're all people, we're all families, we're all, I'm an American first and a Southerner by. I always heard people say I was born American and Southern by grace of God. You probably heard that from country people, but there's that thing, and obviously the big elephant in the room. We just had somebody pop shot at a former president,
God, yes.
And it's spooky. It's really spooky, and I hate it when I see people's reactions. If they're like in their 20s, and I say that now because I'm not in my 20s, I said some goofy stuff in my 20s. I was more left leaning, and would not have liked to have had a record of that. But now everything you say and everything you think comes out, and I'm just like, look, guys, we got to remember there's going to be presidents you're not going to like, but you got to try to respect the position. And
of course.
What hopefully they try to do, you try to give them the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, it's rough.
How's this? The way I see it, the office of the presidency has always been respected, regardless, like you said, whether you're in agreement or not in agreement, that's the office, then you respect it. And then whatever, that's it. But that's not the case anymore, unfortunately.
Sure. Well, when you deal with, as you'd mentioned, law enforcement and whatnot, most people, they see a blue uniform and it's just pure hate. Now, some of that might have been interactions from other people before. Maybe they just was raised to dislike police or whatever.
Right.
But then there's also certain positions that people just tend to. Not too many people when I was a kid would hear the little music and go, the freaking ice cream man. Everybody's like, hey, it's the ice cream man.
Right.
I've never met anybody who really hated the ice cream man. But it's like, look, you're going to have ones that are more competent and ones that are less competent, and that's just the nature of it, guys.
Of course it is.
Humans, we're only going to be able to deliver as well as we can. Some people have better people skills and diplomacy skills. It's just the nature of it.
Of course, and that's always been that way, But
always will be as long as we have.
Of course,
human beings in the position.
Well, that's a whole other show. But I personally think that they're going to use that difference in human behavior or judgment to down the road put AI into positions of like policing, and they're the rationale behind it will be the machine or the AI or whatever you want to call it, the robot, whatever, doesn't doesn't make doesn't take action based on personal motives. How's that? Like a human being does. So in other words, we can rule out unjust or unfair treatment, and I have a problem with that. But I sometimes I see that that's coming down the pike for us, and that's going to be how they're going to introduce it for people to be on board with it.
Okay, there's right now for me, and again, I'm probably talking like an old person because I am, but okay.
In other words, we've been alive long enough to know, yeah.
And I think, just like say, like the people who watch fact checking or whatever on Facebook. Somebody had made a comment. It was a friend of mine. He was just going on about his job, and he was venting, and like, man, sick of doing the work of 6 people. Same, buddy, I get you. And doing this and that, and so just some days I'm just done. And I don't know if it was Apocalypse Now or like Hamburger Hill or something.
Right.
Some guy said, "Let's do it, man. Let's torch the whole village," and it was a joke. People were laughing, ha, they got the joke.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you went, yeah, like okay, you're talking a little crazy now. Let's back it up. I got flagged. They're like, you're fighting violence. I'm like,
it's like, hello, what happened? It's like,
what? But I've seen like straight up, honest to God, kind of really almost skullduggery and stuff. And I'm going, it's literally it got Emmys and or whatever, So.
Well, and like what you were talking about when, the first time I heard that reference to pew pew, I was like, huh? Pew 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 pew. What does that mean? And apparently this is code for, instead of like when you use a firearm to it was for certain look, especially like fluff tube, what they call it, that's code for using that in armament, like pew pew. And I felt so stupid because I was like, what's pew pew? And it's like, this is, we're going to have to come up with a whole different language, like
yeah. We're started out with clicks and lines and cryptic phrases to mean something, and now we're going to go back to it because groupthink has gotten so out of control. You're like you said, you almost got to like draw symbols in the sand to communicate and wipe it away before the
it's like
Caesar's
haven't you ever heard these movies, for the mafias, when these mafia movies that they were being always scared that they're being listened to. So they would have, the thing, meet me by the place and we'll go there to, that place. We're going to have to talk like that, always like aware
talking, that. My friend of my friend, from
exactly. That, exactly. That guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
We'll go to that place with a fire hydrant beside it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People, we might laugh, but we're almost there. We are almost there right now, where we have to substitute one word for another, and until that word gets that phrase or those words get like frowned upon. That's, which is kind of stupid, but I can see where.
Well, it really is. And what bothers me is that up until recently, I mean, it depends on your worldview of how much you know about history. I am a big history buff. I'm also, and I'm kind of maybe sort of a wannabe sociologist. I love the way different cultures developed and things like that. And you go somewhere like Iran in the 70s or somewhere like that, for better or worse, they were very Western. There was ladies going to college and, little mini skirts and everything was cool. Nobody was covered up head to toe. And again, that's their choice, man. I'm not dogging anybody's faith any more than, like, say, a Christian faith that wants you to dress head to toe and not look anybody in the eye, look at the ground. Like, man, that's oppressive. It seems like when times get crazy, that sometimes that rises up. You know, look at Hitler. You know, he was primed. If things are going really well in Germany, he probably would have had a leg to stand on.
Sure, of course. That's what people don't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to say, okay, how do this is a joke. I think if the people at the art college had been a little kinder and maybe gave him a little bit more room, maybe he would have been a painter or an architect, which is apparently the guy who did a lot of the layouts for the different, like the Wolf Slayer and all this different stuff. He wanted to be an artist. And deny an artist. I'm not saying that you're.
Well, no, you know, there's been arguments, and I'm not really that well versed. But from what I understand, it's thought that after World War I, the sanctions that were placed on Germany and what happened to their economy kind of like resulted in what came in the 30s, and then at the end came, you know, was World War II, because among other reasons. It's not that simple, but yeah, that
right.
They were too
There are a lot to unpack,
harsh.
but when you create a vacuum in anywhere politically or whatnot, there's going to be a reaction. Love or hate.
People
Trump,
gotta eat. Like, there's nothing worse.
Well, people
gotta eat.
Well, there's no quicker way to make me one way or the other to tell me that I can't do that. I'll do it twice just because you said I couldn't.
Right.
That's human nature, unfortunately. But you're not going to, people go say, for example, for Trump. People say, well, how in the world? And what's that? I said, look, man, what choice have you given them?
Yeah.
The way politics is set up, it's the same, more or less, you know, horse and pony show that you've had, and you're just changing heads on it. It's still backed by the same company, the same pharmaceuticals, the same whatever. And not to say that Trump doesn't have some connections to that. He's a man of wealth, so he's going to have some connections with it. But
that thing that you said about the pharmaceuticals, I want to interrupt you real quick, Steve. Normally, I have only, you know, I have Roku, and I look at the free stuff. I watch TV, but I don't, and you know. But the other day, I had one of these paid channels. It was Hulu, as a matter of fact. They gave me a 99 cent. I said, I'll try it. So basically, I was looking at more. I kid you not. Every single commercial break, it's a pharma commercial. Doesn't. It's all the time, and it was like, holy crap, this is ridiculous. Get to the point that I just muted. It's like I'm tired of this, and it's like
I despise commercials. Do you remember back in the day? Like, I could remember it would be something cool, you know, time for timer, and it's like these little PSAs, and it's sketchy, or you know, I'm just a bill.
I remember that.
Like that.
Yeah,
those were cool.
Schoolhouse Rock.
Schoolhouse Rock was killer.
Yeah.
Or even the commercials would be like prime Star Wars timer, you know, Evel Knievel, you know, $6 Million Man playset or something.
Yeah. Right. It's like, well, it was like, how can I tell you? It was. How's this? And I know people will say, well, you know what? The I guess since I'm a hypnotist and I always think of the subconscious angle. Basically, you might think, well, they're talking about pharmaceuticals to help people. No, I'm sorry.
Right.
What you're talking about is sickness. Okay?
No, they're not fixing. They're not wanting to fix people. They're wanting. It's like, okay.
This is like this is not like, or this is not like, hey, we've got a treatment for acne, which is very general. Like everybody, it's like cares about, hey, acne. No, they're talking about very serious. Diseases, and it's like, yeah, you know, you sound like what you're offering is a solution because you've got this medicine that will supposedly treat it, but there's a lot of messaging about being sick, and I'm not talking about like acne. I'm talking about very dire, which I'm thinking to myself, unfortunately, if you found yourself, this is a conversation you would think you would have with your doctor, you know.
Yeah, there was laws in place before that.
Yes.
Like, I remember growing up, and there were cigarette commercials and beer commercials and all that, and then they changed that, and they turned around and replaced it with pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
So it went from self-medication to, well, it's still kind of self-medication, because now you'll go to the doctor and go, hey, I heard there's a new diabetes medicine, or But
Yeah.
okay, again, I don't know how you was raised, but I was raised kind of in neighborhoods where, like, there was the pusher guy, and it's like, yeah, here, try this out, it's new, and then you're like, oh, that's pretty good, I like that, and then come back, well, the first one was free. They're not trying to cure people; they're trying to build
Sure.
a constituency, and
Right. They're not curing, they're
buyers.
treating, their treatment. And, depending
Well,
on what it is you
they're
got, they've got a
slinging.
customer for years.
Yeah, a sling. I don't see a difference between Willie selling crack or something up on the corner, and to James, the pharmaceutical rep, bringing in trials and stuff to give to the doctors of stuff that's
Yeah.
maybe just now in FDA trials.
Let me tell you something. I was reading not too long ago an article. They were talking about how the doctors' offices, how they make their money. When they, in other words, it's like in the millions of dollars sometimes if they don't get on program with either having certain tests performed on their patients or pushing certain drugs. I mean, they're not. In other words, the that time where doctors were independent. In other words, they ran their offices as they saw fit. That's gone, because if they want to get reimbursed by insurances, and if they want a little kickback, or well, not a little kickback, I take that back. If they want to get paid off by that pharmaceutical, that in other words, their infrastructure of how they make a lot of money is you got to do these things, push this drug, push this testing, push this treatment, and if
It's
you
a game
don't,
now.
yeah, and that's very disturbing. Because, and then and we'll bring it up again for somebody like us that's a little bit older that has the before, we lived through that. You see the difference where, like, you went to the doctor that you liked the way they were, but it was a one-on-one, and they could tell you based on their experience or whatever you agreed to what the treatment should be depending on what was going on, and those days are gone. I think unfortunately a lot of MDs find themselves, I don't know, purposely or because this is the only way I can run my office is this way.
There's still people. I'm sorry, I know I'm taking it down kind of a political area, but here was the shutdown for COVID, and I know a lot of people that were like, I will not take it, I'll just and that was my working as it's like I took the shots.
Oh, there was a lot of people that were in a jam. I'll tell you this much. They were in a difficult what's it called, situation when it came to doing that, because it's like, or remember, once upon a time, this was towards the beginning where it wasn't understood really what the repercussions are going to be down the road, which now it's becoming very evident, right?
Well, do you remember when initially Fauci was like, yo, this is absolutely life and death. We got to get it to the adults. We got to do all this. Oh, now we got to get it to the kids. And, that was one of the lowest risk of actually getting it, and especially of dying from it.
Exactly.
And then now it's at the point where it's like, well, the findings, wasn't really near as fatal as we thought it was, and DDD.
Oh, no.
And even Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates was really pushing it, and then he turned around and I guess sold it and come up with a new treatment and said, well, that's really wasn't that good. Now, but this one here, this new one.
Let me tell you something.
This is great.
It was like, wait a minute, unless it's something deadly, which and let's face it, now that we've had the luxury of, well, not the luxury, but we were able to look back like 3 years. Really, the people that were most at risk were people that had health complications to begin with, which, by the way, even before this, these are the people that even if they caught, let's say, the flu, right, they were still at a higher risk of dying, all right, just because they had health problems to begin with, all right? Those are the ones that were more susceptible. So if you were in okay health, it's like, write it out, take it and then just write it out. It'll be a whatever. But yeah, it was that whole, Let me tell you something. I think that overall, everybody, unless you're living under a rock, has become a big cynic when it comes to
Hmm.
advice coming from the medical field. Everybody now is like, man, once upon a time, I would have believed everything you said, but not anymore because,
Right. Well, someone who comes into a room, which it's I've had some family like this, and don't get me wrong, back in the day, but I can't say, well, super trustworthy. You also had doctors that said, I'm a doctor,
mm-hmm,
but I smoke camels because, or whatever, or they pimped out some cigarette, or they pimped out something, this and that. So, there was always that money incentive.
sure,
People could always be turned on some level, be it ego, be it
mm-hmm,
money, be it sex or power connection, something. That's how, like, the CIA turns people. I watched a lot and learned quite a bit about interrogation and making assets, and it's the same darn thing, man. It goes through businesses, it goes through schools, it
You
goes
know
through
what? And I'm glad you brought
churches.
that up, Steve, because most people, when you put that scenario, you just, this, CIA and brainwashing or, all this, everybody thinks that it's like a different world, like a high stakes, spy world. And we realize, wait a minute, they've been doing this to a bunch of normies. You know what I'm saying? It's, in other words, where people didn't, it was like, well, this is the plot to some great thriller movie, or this only happens in spy world. Like, that's not my world. I live in regular normie world. And people are realizing what you just said, that control, that mind control, is being done on everybody, across the board in different ways, depending on what they want the outcome to be. A lot of people are like,
Right.
what? What do you mean, Dave? What? And it's unfortunate because, you feel like walking around going, it's like, or, we're all sheep or something.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I used to think, all these people, and they're herding people into lines, and we're individuals, man, and we need to be. But, the older I get, the more that I see people want to be ruled. When George Washington, here I go with my history, when
Go
George
ahead.
Washington, did his thing, there were people going, this is wonderful. That's great. Hey, you can be our new king. And he's like, whoa, pump the brakes, which I don't think he said pump the brakes. It'd be great if he did, but
Yeah.
let's slow thy roll, okay? We literally just got away from the king. We don't need a new king.
But you know what? At least you could say that back then, at the very least, because let's face it, before the Revolutionary War, everybody thought of themselves as being subjects of King George. So it was like, it wasn't that you would think, okay, we've got a new king, because that was the form of that people were familiar with. They still hadn't caught on to why the Revolutionary War, without that taxation, without representation thing going on. But yeah, they were thinking, okay, King, this is our new King George, King Washington.
Yeah, what's the old song? Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And man, I don't know. I'm very much a constitutionalist. I'm very much, we had slavery back then. This is true. So did many other countries, and it's still very, very big in certain African countries. And there's been white slavery and all kinds of different slavery.
Yeah.
None of it's good. But if we're going to squash it, let's squash it everywhere.
Well, let me tell you something that people don't realize. Even back then, if you really got into a bad way economically, you indentured yourself. Basically, you sold yourself into bondage for X amount of years.
Right.
As a way to survive. If you had no way to survive, hopefully you lived through the experience and came out the other end. As far
Right.
as the indenture servitude part, because you were not
Indenture
treated well
servitude.
sometimes, depending
Well,
on.
here's the thing. To have something here called poor farms,
Yes.
and it was usually on the same grounds, like by Western State, they had one on the same property. And I remember Grandma saying, boy, don't quit leaving those lights on. You trying to put me in the poorhouse. I'm like, We're going to put you in a horror house. What are you talking about? I didn't understand until I was older.
Right.
But that was a real thing. And, but that was also a time when you could mail, I think it was, you could mail a child up to 50 pounds. I think it was around like 1909 or something.
Right.
Literally. Because people couldn't afford, like, whatever, the train fare or something. Madness. I don't know how in God's name you managed, say you had 4 or 5 kids in little pokes or sacks. How did you take care of them? They just wear the same diaper? Anyway.
Yeah, no.
These are the thoughts that kept me out of the really good colleges.
Right. The people don't realize that, as a matter of fact, the from what I understand, this thing, especially with the almshouse and the poorhouses, when Henry VIII, I'm talking, of course, England, after he became the head of the church and he did away with all these abbeys and priories and monasteries. Well, these
Right.
institutions would normally feed the poor outside. When he got rid of them, it fell to kind of the public and the thing to feed the poor or the, indigent, whoever was out there. And that's when they started with these almhouses and poorhouses. They eventually came over here, the idea, which is a way to take care of those people, whether they were... It was like, I think everything under the sun, if you just couldn't fend for yourself or had the money, like you said, somebody that lost a husband. But usually it was women that lost husbands that, had fallen on hard times, or if people, like you said, were special needs, or everybody was thrown in there for good measure, which, by the way, was, in a way, those places were kind of dangerous.
Well, it was different times, Back in the old days, it was where, I'll give you an example, and I'll give you how you could absolutely have tight community without a lot of government intervention, a lot of political maneuvering and whatnot. Like, remember, like in the old days when somebody would move into a neighborhood or something, and you would have somebody come over, hi, I felt, or you guys are moving, we bring us chicken, or my
Right.
missus sent me over with a pie, or
Yes.
yah. And you set the tone.
Exactly.
Nowadays, you don't approach anybody. God forbid one of your kids enter the yard and you throw your hand up and say hello. Well, why are you talking to my kid? And that's a weird thing. So people keep to themselves.
Yes.
And that's we kind of isolated ourselves, especially when COVID hit.
Yeah.
I don't think people have quite gotten over it. And I had moved to the little area I'm in now, in Livingston County, Kentucky, and I was taking care of the yard. Okay, it's got a decent-sized backyard. So anyway, I'm out there trying to push this, and it was a monster, and actually had messed up my knee a little bit, puffed up,
Oh.
And then one of my neighbors mowed it. Now, I was like, maybe they're being cool, or maybe they're going, we're going to look at it,
Right.
and be a problem, and, and I'm like, oh, boy. And then the day before the guy was coming to do it, the guy did it again. And I couldn't get a hold of the guy because I didn't have his phone number at the time.
Right.
And finally I called the guy, and I said, hey, I was just wanting to talk to you about this and that. He said, yeah, I hit your yard the other day. I said, I know that. I just kind of want to talk to you about it. First of all, thank you. And hopefully it was in the spirit that I'm taking it, but I didn't upset you, did you? I said, what? No. And anyway, long story short, he's taking care of the yard. He just says, hey, throw me some gas. I'm happy to mow it for you. I mean, it was like nothing. It was like,
Yeah.
$20 for gas, 4 months worth of mowing. Then just sign me up.
That's great.
So there are still good people, and
Sure.
but so I'm like, hey, I'm going to town. Do you need something from town? Oh, hey, what kind of whatever? Do you like fried chicken? Every so often I'm going to run to KFC and whatever, bring something back, just to be cool. And now that this neighbor knows I'm okay, they squawk it to the other neighbors. yeah, this guy, he's quiet, he's laid back, he works especially these adults. Because sometimes you have rough neighbors.
Oh yeah, no,
And
I know.
none of,
Sometimes neighbors are, and there's, every
well,
personality is different. It's some people are just like,
right. Well, lucky for me, being married into a family that was from Chicago,
mm-hmm.
I understood the tempo and the vibe and the this and that. And, once they get that you're laid back, you can joke with them, you can take a joke.
Right.
It's more like this is more like a 70s or 80s neighborhood.
Right. Well, where I
It's
live, I have
work.
6 neighbors around me because everybody's on real large properties, and everybody
Hmm.
came to over here was like curious, and everybody knows everybody's traded phone numbers,
Yes.
in case. And as a matter of fact, like a couple of months ago, they've got a couple of cattle and a horse. And they're going to build, but they've got a trailer all the way at the other end. When I was coming off my property, I see this big branch came off a tree, an oak, and it brought down their fence like all the way to the ground.
Oh, no.
So I ran over there and I knocked on the girl's door, and she's looking at me because we've seen each other, and you could tell she's looking at me. She's got 2 babies in there. I said, "Hey, your fence was down on the ground, because she's got the cattle, she's got the horse." She goes, "Oh my God, my father-in-law, he's like in Palatka, which is it's a drive." And I said, "Do you have a rope?" And she goes, "There's this one right there." And I took it and I tied it from one post to the other at least so that they wouldn't get out because they would be right on the road. And people do, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like, I don't talk to them every day, but God, if you see a situation where
Hmm.
something like that, it's like, of course you're going to help. But I
Well,
understand also what you're saying, that people is like, nah, it's not my problem. That's their problem.
well, it, I'll tell you this. My main thing was, it's like, hey, I work a lot of hours.
Hmm.
So if you would be kind enough, if, somebody's farting around or
Yeah,
neighborhood, they don't call cops, they call, they're not the cops, that vibe. But they're like, yeah, on whatever, and I said, I'll do the same with you. Goes out, I'll give you a holler, hey, they're smoking out of your
of
room.
course, of course, of course.
And
And
it's,
yeah, and after a while,
hey,
when you live in a neighborhood, you know who belongs there. You see who's the normal flow of people or vehicles
right.
versus when you see like, oh, who's that or what is that? And not that you're looking for it, but you're always. I tell the story like about 3 Halloweens ago. I don't know if you've seen those Halloween decorations that basically they put like looks it's almost like full size human, but basically you hang them and they're like sheets like and they flow in the wind. Well, I have like
Right.
a gazebo out front, and I had gotten a couple of those, and I hang them there, and they're like Halloween time, and I left. I went to do some groceries, and all of a sudden, my neighbor across the street, she calls me. She goes, "Marlene," and I'm like, "What? There's two guys in black suits in front of your house." I'm like, "What do you mean in front of my house?" Because I'm gated, and I'm fenced. She goes, "No, inside, right by the close to your," and I was like, "What?" I was like ready to like leave my groceries and run out. And then I said, "Wait, let me ask you, what do they look like?" She's, "They're both in black suits." I go, "No, so and so. Those are Halloween decorations." She's like, "What?"
Oh, yeah, okay.
But remember, there's the distance here between. This is not like a regular residential where you're like right across the street. She's like an angle, and as a matter of fact, it's a graded road. It's not even a paved road. What we got between us. She's on the other side. And I go, "No." And her husband, when he got home and we would tell, he was laughing. He was laughing so hard when he heard that. She's calling me up to let me know that I got 2 guys in black suits in front of my doorstep. But you know what? It's funny, but at the same time, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about here, where you're hoping that your neighbor sees something and calls you to find out, "Hey, are you okay?" Or, "Look, I'm seeing this." That's called Once Upon a Time in America. People used to do that all the time.
Yeah.
That was the
Well,
norm.
again, things are so crazy um, that, like you said, people, um, it's like, okay, everybody thought, oh, well, we're like, maybe we're not as educated, our people weren't as educated then because they don't have, the social media and this and that. I think now that, I'm not saying somebody needs to have an entire wall of encyclopedias, but you know what? The power goes off; those encyclopedias still work.
Oh yeah, I remember the encyclopedias.
Obviously, beyond writing and whatnot, the written word has always been really important to me. And growing up dyslexic, I could barely read, and it took me years and years of therapy and whatnot to get it. And it's almost like talking to somebody who was, like you said, an indentured servant or a slave or somebody, and then finally they're free to go, oh, wow, I can learn all this. I can not just hear it from somebody. I can read it, document it.
Yes.
And there's power in that. And
so, I mean, people don't, I've always been a reader and a book collector, and and I know a lot of people have gotten away from it because now you can get the ebooks or Kindle and this and that. But let me tell you something: if you don't have access to the internet, there goes your reading material.
Right.
And no, I've always have hard copies of things. Not everything, but to me it was like, I've always had a bunch of books, and I've got a stack right here on my desk right now. But it's one of those things, and let's go down conspiracy lane. Anything that's produced on those formats can be altered. Whereas if you got the hard copy of something, it's like nobody, no Mandela effect kind of thing, where, hey, I knew that's not what that said before. That kind of deal.
Right.
So,
well, what's bad too is, unfortunately, here we, in a world where there's so many classic books and this and that that are now kind of blackballed.
Oh man, I'm telling you that upsets me greatly, because at the end of the day, if you don't want to read something, then don't read it. Don't.
Right.
It's there.
Right.
Whatever. Don't access it. Don't. And that kind of deal. It's like I said, I've always been a reader. I've always been into books. Literature, and I've always, that to me, that was like, that's an open field. As a matter of fact, the other day, I'm getting into this thing of the of what you used to do. I don't know. Have you ever heard of this guy named Carl Panzram? He was around like from the 1900s to 1920s, and he was what they thought was a serial burglar, but it turned out he had been, he was one of these, well, as a young boy, he was one of these that ended up in a reform school, and then of course he kept on in a life of crime. And he would always do stints of prison time, but for burglaries, like that kind of deal. All right. Mm-hmm. And not till he got caught, like in the 1920, around, that he actually started to confess to all these murders he had committed. So much so that at some point the authorities thought he was like he was making it up, because there's always prisoners that will confess to especially hard crimes that they didn't commit. But he was providing with so much detail that they were like, no, this guy really did do. But anyway, the point is, one of the times he's in prison, there's a guard. I want to say, was it Leavenworth, I think, who sneaks in writing materials and tells him, hey, why don't you write your life story? Long story short, the guy does. He gives him all the details of all these horrible things that he'd done. This guy was horrible details of not only the burglaries, but and then when things would get hot, he would go from the East Coast to the West Coast. One time he would become like one of these, he would stow away on his ships. Like when things got really hot, he would disappear for a while. Anyway, at the end of the day, he ends up getting executed. All right. This guard had all these materials because gave him back to him. He tried to get it published, and none of the publishing houses would accept it. He was not able to get the work of that man published till like 1970. We're talking like a 50-year span. All right, is when he was able to get the materials that this guy had, true life, And then, as a matter of fact, I can't remember, the papers are with some university now in their library. And it's one of those things where some of the things that are detailed there are pretty horrid when you go into it. But at the same time, it's like, it is what it is. And if you don't want to read it, then don't read it. Don't access it. Don't.
Well, again, I believe history is history.
Right.
I believe not everything is, remember like the old time, like little kids, and they'd have like socks that had like Mickey Mouse on one side and Daffy Duck on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the world we live in. And,
Sure.
and if all you do is show the positive, you're going to build very. I'm sure I sound like a boomer, but you're going to build weak-willed people who are going to crumble with anything.
Right.
My girlfriend is more of a love and light person, and I'm like, that's great. Okay, love and light is swell.
No,
good. If you can, what I mean is, if you can have love and light in your life, cool. Okay,
right.
But I'm that guy that will take a slightly different path, even though I'm afforded a better path. I know, not everybody gets to do that, but there's some real life, there's knowledge in darkness. I mean, on my podcast, I talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
On my outro,
Sure.
I always go, go out there and enjoy the rest of your day and, drink your fill of life. But as the as the sun settles behind the pines and the shadows grow long, make sure to check your closets, check this, there may be this and that. But even though you can be afraid, there's knowledge and fear, and there is learning in arduous situations.
Of course.
That's how you temper metal. You put it through the fire. Trial by fire. That's a real thing.
Absolutely, I agree.
But now, sadly, this might come off sounding bad, and I apologize. But everywhere is a safe space now. Everywhere is to the point where you can't have a discussion of differing stuff because someone is a Nazi or
Right.
someone is a.
No. And here, see what I mean about there they go. They're on cue, my children. Not my, I have children, but they're all grown. But so instead I have little dogs that bark inappropriately. Come here, shut up.
No.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Keep going.
No. Had been raising still.
Well, how can I say this? I think that
Kind of generations to get them where we want.
I think that how's this? I was
Like
one
a
of
lap
these.
dog.
How's this? I think I agree with you, as long as exposure is age appropriate. As you know what I'm saying. I was one of these that I was letting my kids believe in Santa Claus as long as I could stretch it.
Mm-hmm.
I was.
Yeah. Oh no.
I was making stuff up when they were coming home from school and telling me, "Mom, there's a kid at school that told me that Santa's not real, that you're Santa." I'm like, "What? No." I tried to take that as far as I could.
Yeah.
Because they have their whole life
bad.
to realize too.
Oh yeah. I was kind of savage because I had a kid, I guess some kid that was making fun of my oldest girl at the time. And because growing up, I always put together the toys, and I always did this and that. And the kind of gag was, oh, well, it's because I was an elf. He says, well, you're tall. Well, yeah, well, when you're an elf, you're not. Elf is short. But see, you see how they kind of poke a little bit. He used to be tall, okay. And she was starting to go almost into middle school, and we ended up having to break it to her because my first inclination was going, well, Bobby maybe wouldn't be that if he had his dad.
Well, let me tell you something. I remember that, my oldest, my daughter, they tried to get down to the, and I was like, no, but it's one of those things where it's a gradual thing. But again, what you were talking about as far as exposure to things that are not pleasant, that not everything has got to be like, oh, Not everything is a
Well,
microaggression. How's that?
no. Everything's a microaggression. Sometimes you can. I'm not saying in everything, but generally I try not to be a victim. There's nothing wrong with being a survivor. I can take a being or a dent in my childhood and go, that was a life lesson.
Sure.
Maybe not the life lesson I wanted, but I can either let it control me or I can learn from it. So, but and you're right about exposure.
Mm-hmm. Some things are unavoidable. And some things there's not.
Right.
It's unavoidable.
Well, just like, the Auschwitz camp, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Would I take like a 7-year-old there? No way in hell, pardon my language.
No.
Do I think that's necessary? Yes. I would have kept, like what they call it, the Wolfstag or whatever, like Hitler's whatever, and turn it into a museum and have a lot of pictures and things of some of the atrocities that happened. So people go, oh yeah, this looks like a beautiful place. This is the plans that were made in this location.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to interrupt you real quick, though. Especially when you said that thing about history or museums, I do believe that history ought to be accurate. Good, bad, and ugly. And I think a lot of times, Steve, history has been massaged one way or the other for whatever reason. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, no, if whatever it is, if it was good or if it was that way. I mean, in other words, the mindset or sensibilities of that time period might be different now. I mean, like you said, we look at that now, we're like, oh my God. But it's like, stop with that. Maybe if you had lived during those years, your perspective would have been different for whatever reason. Yeah, in historical context, it's got to be accurate. If it's nice, it's nice. If it's over romanticized, whatever. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Okay. There's a time. Yeah. Exactly. My grandparents or whatever be talking about. What women voting? Ha ha.
Yeah.
Crazy talk.
Right.
But back in the day, kids were working in coal mines and chimney sweeps and
yes,
stuff.
exactly.
But it was the times, and
Yes.
it was a necessary evil a lot of times for that family.
Yeah.
Not that you should put your kids into a coal mine, but
Mm-hmm.
people had to survive one way or the other, and sometimes those kids were orphans. That's the only way they could do it. That or pickpocket or go into the sex trade or something awful.
Right. Or their schooling was very limited because they had to be at home, let's say, working on the farm, because this is the way the family survived. It's like their schooling was very basic.
My folks left. I think my mom went to 7th grade,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like in the middle of 13 kids. And my dad, I think he went to into 5th or 6th.
Right.
And my dad was a shrewd guy. He could be a brutal guy, but he was self-educated, and he knew how human nature works. He was a great student of that. And that's one of the things that he taught me, is that it doesn't matter if it's now, 1,000 years in the future, or 1,000 years in the past. People are people, and they operate, and they're triggered by more or less the same desires, needs, fears, and wants as the first caveman. And if you can read that, and say you're in business and you can exploit that, okay, maybe not for evil, but to move a product.
Oh, yeah.
My gosh, look at the trade area. They'll sell you. You don't, so like, whatever, make it easy. You don't have it's not a problem, but they problem, reaction, solution. It's
Sure. Exactly.
like a
No, let me tell you something. What is it? It's called being a student of life. How's that?
around you. You can get caught. What was it? Ferris said. More or less like that.
I'm telling you. And
I agree.
No, in other words, you know what, negative experiences sometimes, like you said, depends also on the personality. It can temper you and make you more resilient and more self-reliant, depending also on the severity and at what age. Or it's produced monsters sometimes if it's very adverse experiences. You know, there's a lot of factors that contribute to it.
Okay. And I apologize, but there was a picture of a kid, and he was walking, holding his mom, his hand, the other hand.
I'm losing you, Steve.
And he was all bummed out because he had a boot and a shoe.
Right.
Next, barefoot on one foot in a shoe, and the dad had a boot and barefoot on that one. So it was a thing of perspective. You know,
Right.
he had it immeasurably better than his parents. My parents, and vice versa, vice versa. But I was lucky enough to have parents that shared their stories of
Right.
childhood. Yeah, of course, they had that. We walked 12 miles up and down in the snow to go to school and all that.
Yeah,
Both ways.
and it was all uphill
But-
both ways.
Uphill, yeah, exactly right. And so anyway, but you know, hearing the stories of, but my mom, she worked in like cotton fields as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was people from different poor people. I've said, okay, that's just us. And you a great lesson, but then also it can make you like distrustful of people that have risen up economically. You know, it took me years to kind of unlearn that just because people have a little bit of money doesn't mean that they're bad.
Right.
That,
I
that
know.
the manipulators.
It becomes like when you grow up. Let's face it; these are your authority figures, your parents, the household you grow up in. So, you normally you accept, you know, what they. I mean, people
imprint.
even years later, they still got that
Yes.
authority figure that will, you know, whisper stuff in your ear, even though maybe you're an adult and you know better. Because this is what you grew up as far as the belief systems or the way you look at society or how you handle things. And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a difficult thing to get away from.
And let's be honest, it's kind of like the pair of shoes. Okay, they might not have to be the most comfortable or whatever, but they're shoes you've got broken in.
Yeah.
So it's just that weird. That you know, the devil or whatever you want to
Sure,
call
of
it.
course. And we could, that's a subconscious thing as far as hypnotherapy, you know, that our comfort zone is that. Even though your logical brain, okay, will think, I don't want this, or I'd rather change
Right.
this, or this is difficult. Your subconscious mind will see that as your comfort zone. Like you said, this is the devil I know. And you will, in some instances, sabotage your own efforts. You're resistant to change. Even though logically you're thinking, hey, I want to change this. I don't like this. Your subconscious mind will try to keep you there because, as basic as it sounds, this is the pleasure for you. I know what this is. I feel comfortable in it. I know what this is about. Oh, going out there, making it better. That sounds great. But who knows what might come with it? That's a whole other show. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to overcome, especially from childhood onward.
A self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? That can be good and bad. Like when I went from more or less just doing, corrections and all that stuff and branching out into, written word and all of that, which I'd already been researching stuff for years, and especially everything from the paranormal and stuff like that. It takes a certain mindset it's really weird because you kind of break your cycle, which is spooky, but it's also free. And
Right.
I think, like you were talking about projects, I love new projects, and when I get to a certain point, like even with writing, I love writing, but I'm like, I would maybe like to see some of these get onto Amazon or some sort of streaming thing to see how those would be taken.
Right.
And jump into different things. I would love to have done something related to movies about, prisons and things like that. I could be pretty good in regards of, being the people that go, oh, well, how would the daily be? Okay, when they go to commissary, do they get bags? Do they get paper bags? Do they get plastic bags? You're not going to get plastic bags because they'll put hooch and make hooch.
Right.
Little things that unless you're there, you're just not going to get.
Right.
And,
this is not what the average person realizes about, like what you said, like what goes on inside a prison.
Yeah. Well, and that's maybe not a bad thing, but it's again just like a lot of people in this area would not have a clue what it's like to ride on the subway or what it's like to.
I have no idea.
I don't know, maybe deal with panhandlers or something like that.
Sure.
It just is what it is.
No, well, it's like, and you know what we could get, and again, that's a whole different, which is about flexibility or the ability. Are you guys kidding me? Really? No, they're getting antsy because around here it's starting to thunder, and I have 2 dogs specifically. Some others, they don't care. They'll nap through it. But I have a couple that get all antsy and wound up. Pretty soon I'm waiting for one to jump on my lap. But anyway, as far as people that are being able to adapt or being flexible, or like you said, the ability to learn new things. And let me ask you, Steve, and when you were talking about, stuff that you hear from your parents, I'm going to say, because I've seen that a lot of these older, when I say older ghost stories, like, regional ghost stories, even
right.
Sometimes it was almost like a parable. It almost always became like a cautionary tale, wrapped up, dressed up like a ghost story,
Right.
Stuff that
for sure. Absolutely. We used to get, like, I don't know if I'd ever told you about Peg Leg Lock. Peg Leg Lock was you would have called him a hobo back in the day.
Okay.
And people, he was a wino? No. Winos and hobos are 2 different things. Okay. My mom's father, the guy was young, would jump trains and go going across, different counties and states and whatnot, to find work. And he, unfortunately, it said he fell off the train. Some people said the bulls or the guys in the yard tossed him off the train while it was running, and it killed him. So I don't know. But those folks, would, of course, travel trains. But we had a story about a guy named Peg Leg Lock, and he would do the same sort of thing. And he ended up with, like, in between trains coming through, he would build a little fire, and then as night went on, he'd move the embers, and he'd lay cardboard and a blanket down, and the residual heat would keep him warm. And he ended up about freezing to death. It was a really cold night.
Okay.
And so they'd always tell stories about seeing him with his lantern, walking up and down. You could see like a green ghostly light, and so stay off the tracks. Of course, It's not stay off the tracks because a train would kill you. It was like stay away from the ghosts. So, but it worked.
Some of them, some of them also had, because people don't realize that there was a lot of accidents that happened around railroad tracks, and even like what you were talking about that, because everybody thinks of the people, the hobos, it was like a Depression era thing where they were like, all these hobos were riding the railroad cars because the economy. But that had always been happening because back then, trains were running around everywhere. So, but yeah, you would hear of people, and sometimes they would even have, working in a railroad track, you would always hear these accents of conductors or the brakemen, and then sometimes every once in a while they would find people that had gotten hit by a train, and they could never sometimes figure out who it was. It's like,
well, that unfortunately, train tracks and things were a good dumping ground for bodies. It just is what it is, and human nature. Okay. Again, another good reason to avoid a train track. What's the the line from the Stephen King movie. Hey, you want to go see a human body or a dead body or whatever they call it?
Yes. Yes.
Stand by Me, I think it was.
Stand by Me. Yeah.
That's real life stuff. People being from an area that's not a huge metropolitan area, time moves slower. So some of those experiences that I had as a child, they're going like, you sound like you're from the 1930s or the 40s, you know, which I did have Depression era parents. I was born. They come up through World War II, and
it's so funny because it's like, when I went, it was like, was it me or was it him? And it's like, like,
unfortunately,
we're at the mercy.
I don't know what it is. I'm not saying I get where the Unabomber. I miss just picking up a phone and talking like a normal person on a landline. I miss technology. I don't think we're near as cool as we think we are, or our technology would be better.
No, I know. And then it's really funny now. It's landlines are very expensive. You know, if you want a landline, you're going to pay for it, big time.
I was going to get. Well, that's what it says. We don't have the infrastructure. You've had the bloody lines up 80 years. You know, I don't understand. The phone thing isn't just straight fiber optic now.
Yeah, it's like, that's like, all right. And I worked in the telecommunications field for many, many years, and it's like, what can I say? It's like, I don't know. What can I... And I know some people, because, businesses obviously have landlines depending on what it is, or I know that some people, if they have somebody with medical issues, they need a landline just to make sure that, like, what happened never happens. Like, if they need even 911, that they can find you. Somebody just dials 911, but it's expensive if you can get it out to where you're at, depending also where you're at. But anyway, getting back to what we were talking about before our phones decided to crap out, that we were talking about, back in the day, you would hear all these stories about, because traveling around in trains was common, because this was the way everyone got around. This was
right
pre-plane, and then you would hear.
We were talking about those car scenario tales. That was real. The whole the thing, which what I understand was actually kind of based on a murder that had happened. Which I always thought, well, the red was a symbolism, which I knew it was a young female. So I heard different people say, oh, well, that has to do with what was the I forgot how they termed it. Like, she was at the age of having menstruation, so she was a young female.
Okay.
The wolf being the uncontrolled masculine, and what's going to happen to you? They're going to eat you up, literally. So, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think a lot of times it does come from that angle. Well, even look at, good Lord, I mean, look at like even slasher films, and I know some people absolutely hated them. There's a cautionary tale: the virgin's going to live. If you're promiscuous, you smoke.
Oh, right, my God, the 70s and 80s slasher films. You knew that if you were promiscuous, it's like, oh, you're done. You're dead. That's it.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it to the end of the movie.
Yeah, pack it up. You're done.
Yeah, you're next on the, you're like, yeah. You had that big red sign that next victim. Yeah. Things, it was very predictable. That kind of deal. Oh, have you seen that Geico commercial? Which they don't play it anymore, but it shows them running around, and they all go into.
Let's go hide in the shed with all the tools.
With all the sharp tools.
Yeah, of course.
That even the serial killer's going, oh my God, they're so stupid. That kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think slasher films now. I'm going to, and this has got a taste of the paranormal, and you'll see what I mean. I think sometimes slasher films nowadays are so graphic, they're too graphic, and it's almost like the feeling You know how when you hear, and obviously a movie's a movie and not reality, but you know when you hear of people that have gone off to war, or they're in some situation where they see people getting killed horribly, and it
Right.
is disturbing. I think
Yeah.
that it
Well,
does something psychically to us, besides psychologically, when we see all these movies that are so realistic. When you're talking about people getting tortured and hurt and maimed,
right.
and
Well,
of course the more realistic it is, everybody's like, oh, it's
yeah.
great.
But you get to the point where, and you always heard about, there was always sort of that urban legend. I mean, I guess they do exist, but talking about like slasher film, or not slasher films, snuff films and stuff like that.
Yes.
Um, and I guess, of course it's like I had a friend of a friend, which, when I remember the big thing when I was a teenager, that there was the face of the death thing, which what I understand, all that was staged.
Right.
But, um, but it was a rite of passage, as crazy as that sounds. Are you tough enough to watch this? Are you tough enough?
Right.
But there are real people that I guess would actually do extreme torture and stuff type films. But once you start to get into deeper stuff like Saw and things like that, which I know some people would absolutely love that.
Let me tell you something. Call me a wimp. I don't care. I never got the entertainment aspect of. I just never. Mm-mm.
I didn't like the Saw films, and there was the scene. Of course, Pet Cemetery. I've lost kids. I don't like seeing dead kids walking around. It bugs me. But the scene where the old man is under the bed and he cuts the guy's Achilles tendon with that scalpel,
Ugh.
I feel that every time. I literally feel that every time. And I'm just like, geez, man. But you know what? It did what it was supposed to. It was to scare the hell out of you and to shock you. Kind of pre-jump scare. It was a jump scare of sorts,
Right.
but I just think it was handled better.
Well, you know what? And I think we've become, like, and again, I'm going to refer to our age. Hello, we've become jaded. You remember when the Exorcist came out? What was, I think it was 73. That everybody was, it was, people were running around trying to get exercise. They hadn't been to church in years, and all of a sudden they were like, everybody became this thing where people were like super influenced and scared. I think because up to that point we were kind of like, how's this, on the innocent side when it came to horror films, and it struck some kind of chord in us. And you go fast forward 50 years, and we see such graphic content that a lot of people don't. Oh, it's like you just said, and it's like, man, I'm sorry, but I think number one, psychologically, it does something to you, and number two, I know people. There's something I want to say, maybe if you, I don't want to say makes you a psychopath, but I think that when you deaden human beings to the sufferings of others, even if it's make believe, but it's so graphic, it's like if you were actually looking at it, it's not good for us. It's just not good for us, and I think it opens us up. How's this on a what do you want to call it, on a metaphysical level, to attracting really negative things towards you, especially if you're really into that. If you like watch it, like, and believe me, I went to, like, remember 70s and 80s when all these teenage slasher films came out, but it was like, but nowadays it's like, it's over the top. It's just too much. And I think that on some level, it's just not good for us. Too much immersion in it. How's that?
Well, I was a big, when I was itty bitty, scary movies, like I seen The Exorcist when I was 5. It screwed me up. But, my brothers and them played like Black Sabbath, and Iron Man scared me. They had a song, Alice Cooper had a song called Steven, and scared me. Scared the clean hell out of me. But as I got older, then I was like, well, it's just music and this and that. But because I was so scared of scary stuff, I said, you know what, I'm going to make myself watch this. So I did sort of almost reverse thing. Like, and you would think it would have just broke me on it. Like, I don't know, if you had like, say if you were younger or you've already seen this thing, like, well, we caught Johnny smoking cigarettes. Okay, Dad set them at the table. Here's a cart and start smoking. You smoke them till you're done, and these are the kids puking, and he's done with
Right.
it. But it did the opposite. It just opened me up for more scary movies. But that being said, I didn't have some of the mental issues that people had.
Sure.
So it didn't turn me into a psycho freakazoid or something. But
Right.
but I think it was different. Even back in the days when the PMRC and all that, and everybody was trying to put codes on everything. Yeah, there was always some scarier film, or like, man, like, which for me, like growing up on Salem's Lot and a lot of the television movies, seeing stuff like The Exorcist or seeing Omen was freaky. But there are certain things that hit you in your whatever it is, your regional core. Okay, like say like movies like Death or something. If you live in New York City, stuff like but I also know that if you have like the Blair Witch Project, that freaked me out because, of course, there's a lot of freaking trees here.
Yeah, right. In
So,
other words,
you-
that looks like where I live. Like, wow.
well, and it makes it like in that place where I live, that sucks. And even if you know it's a movie, you're going to bed, and it's always those first minutes you're trying to fall asleep. That's when
Yeah, you think of all those
the
things
stuff's gonna come out.
that normally
Right.
you'd be like, you don't, you're busy with whatever, with life, and then it's like when you calm down, you start thinking about all those. Yeah, when the Blair Witch Project came out, that there was so much of it left to your imagination as far as wigging out. I think that was a great example where the movie let your imagination do the work for them. All right.
Oh yeah, I've always scared myself so much better than probably just about any movie.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, a lot of times. And it was not getting hurt. And it went out. He's no longer.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit on
But-
me, Steve.
I'm sorry. About like me working in prisons.
Well, let me, now that you bring that up, you were, I don't know what level. Let me ask you: when you worked at some of these prisons, did you ever have any hardcore prisoners or people that you knew what they had done that was horrific?
Not sure if I lost you. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. No, all I was saying was, he said when I was little bitty, because I was a very scared kid. That's the whole reason I started studying. Be scared, but I didn't like going out at night. And he said, we'd go out to play in the backyard at nighttime,
Right.
looking at the sky and watching the trees. And he's like, "What are you watching? What are you looking at?" And he says, "I'm keeping an eye out." He says, "For
Yeah,
what?"
no, you were looking out is what you were doing. You were the
Yeah,
lookout.
absolutely.
You're like,
I was a lookout. While I'm watching for gargoyles, and for some reason ninjas. Apparently, I thought ninjas were super powerful, and he said, "I never forgot that was what you was scared of, was gargoyles and ninjas." Which, of course,
Hey.
they took every opportunity to scare me about ninjas and gargoyles. But
hey,
welcome
let me tell
to,
you something. Every
yeah.
kid has. I remember I used to work with a guy, and he told me, like, back in the, I want to say it was a 60 or something. Dark Shadows. That it was like a gothic soap opera with a vampire in it. Or for some reason,
Yes,
he was a kid. He was like 8 or 9 or something like that. And he says that this guy, this Barnabas Collins, the vampire in the thing, really, he said that he started thinking that Barnabas Collins was going to come in through his bedroom window. Of all things, It's just really weird why some kids wig out with certain things.
Well, you know what? That again, like growing up, like Kolchak the Night Stalker, that was my jams. I, as a scared kid, I loved it that he wasn't just like, I'll take care of this. He was like, yeep, yikes, it's a scary. It was like Three Stooges meets the paranormal.
Oh no, I love the Kolchak. Let me tell you something. I love the movies, and I like the series. They ran the series for a short time, but he was great. They picked a very good actor for that part because, like you said, he was one of these guys who was like persistent, but always getting himself in trouble, and he was vulnerable at times, like that kind of deal. That was a very good character. Well, that they developed for that series, and I'm surprised they never kept it going then longer than that. I know they tried to do a spin-off later on, but it was like it's not good at all.
Yeah, well, they tried to get the Stuart something or another.
Yeah, I know it was Stuart Townsend,
movie.
And it was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me now.
Oh man, he's too cool. He's too cute.
Yeah, no man, you need a guy with like that seersucker suit and and his white shoes. He was such a great character, and always getting in trouble with his body. It was just like, yeah. He was a flim-flam guy that happened to be a reporter, a persistent one, but yeah.
Exactly right. He was a huckster.
Yeah.
He was about 2 steps from like a carny caller. Hey, come on down to. That was his thing. But they were talking about doing, what was that? They got Cranston guy who did the show Breaking Bad.
Yes.
Doing that because he's kind of got sort of that same sort of.
Yes, he does.
Kind of ragged face and stuff.
Yeah.
He can play goofy. Like I've seen him like in comedies. Maybe he could do it, but they would have to. I'm afraid it would be too woke.
Yeah, I know. It'd be like okay, it's like forget it. You're it's cringeworthy. No, absolutely, I believe it. Let me ask you. And I asked you this, but I think it's when we faded out. When you were doing the prison thing, did you ever? I don't know what level security the prison you were at. Did you ever have any prisoners it was max? Okay. Did you ever have any prisoners that you knew what they had done that you got a weird vibe around them? Like besides the fact that they were dangerous, but on a psychic or metaphysical level?
Do you mean did I catch?
I mean, let me ask you. I imagine. Did you ever have, and I don't know how much they would tell the guards as far as what they were in there for, or if it was just common knowledge. Or even maybe not. Maybe some that you'd look at them and maybe they're the quiet type and you'd be like, man, there's something about you. I wouldn't turn my back on you for nothing in the world. Like they gave you the heebie-jeebies. Oh, Steve, I think I lost you. Are you there? Oh, boy.
Hello.
Okay, yes, you're back. Did you hear my question?
Okay. Yeah. When people, I'm a sexual predator, but I can definitely.
Okay, Steve. God, I can't understand what you're saying.
Let me move around.
Okay.
Let me know when you can hear me.
Yeah, now you just came in great.
Okay. I don't want to say that I can say, I can pick out a predator, but I can definitely pick up if there's a hinky vibe from somebody.
Right.
And a lot of times there's something. But yeah, there are some people that you've dealt with that really had a really malevolent vibe to them.
Right.
So, yeah, and
that I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure that if they're in prison, they're there for a reason. As far as
just environment. Period. Some people kind of, you're going to have to get over being uncomfortable or scared for your job. That's true. But the day you feel comfortable in there, the day you're walking around there going, I got this, you better go turn your badge in and go home. You've got you comfortable, you're going to get yourself killed.
Sure. And the reason why I'm asking you this is, all these prisons, even once they're closed down, that they're, because they're so old. I can't think of any prison that doesn't have a a history. It's got a bad reputation for being badly haunted, and I'm thinking, you that saw the other side of it, do you think that there's good reason to believe that it's, haunted, but in a bad way?
I think, well, I don't think a haunting's got to be a psychic scar.
Right.
A haunting could be, I've been at places where old schools and you'd hear kids playing on the playground. Things like that. Go to a shop that 200 years ago had been where they ground meal and baked bread, and sometimes you'll hear, people sliding the metal trays.
Right.
out.
That residual is just a repetition. Yes.
Yeah, residual haunting, and maybe, I call them good hauntings. I call them, not everything that's got to be paranormal has to be, they found 3 heads in a duffel bag in the back of this, whatever.
Well, no. And I know that a lot of stuff is basically imprinted in the fabric of that space, especially like you just said, something that was done over and over and over and again, and it's not bad or good. It's just something that sometimes, like I've even heard of smells like baking bread or coffee or
cigar or something.
Yeah, cigar smoke. There's cigar smell, whatever it is that right. It comes and goes, and there's no intelligence behind it.
Right. Well, and then sometimes, especially have it somewhere that was a drawing room.
Yes. People
smoked cigars and had sifters of brandy for frickin' 80, 90 years. Some of that smell gets into the wood. If it's really hot, or if it's stormy, it's going to release some of the smell. Just like if you've been around somewhere that had a lot of pine in it, it gets very hot. Sometimes that pine smell comes out. Sometimes the pine even sweats. Sweats out some pine sap. That's stuff that you have to sort of disprove or, take in consideration.
Let me ask you, do you think that, based on what you're saying, that you've gone, in other words, you've worked at places like a prison, and I know that you wrote the book about a haunted prison, and you've gone to other places. Is there a different feel when you go to a prison setting, even if it's an abandoned one, even if it's one that's closed down, versus going to a regular old haunted spot, whatever, but that's not.
Oh, yeah, it's a difference between walking through a horse stable and walking through a NASCAR change pit. The energy is just, you can't compare the two.
Right.
And again, due to being a legacy, my dad was a guard in the penitentiaries, and my grandfather was there for bootlegging back in the 30s. He actually served about a year in there as an inmate. So it maybe because of muscle memory, but also being in that vibe. It's just like you take somebody that's lived in a city for 20 years, they move to a small community, and they go visit the city and go, yeah, okay, yeah, I know this tempo.
Right.
It certainly has a different. It's just a different animal. You just can't compare the two. Which there was the first book, The Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, and then there was Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary Part 2, Habitual Hauntings, and it touched on different stories and touched on some of the ghost stories that I didn't really have the full tell on. And later, people would come to me at book signings and go, "Oh, well, I noticed you didn't talk about this guy, or Kelly Moss," which is sort of like the resident big ghost there.
Right.
And then I got a bunch of different stories and amalgamated them and turned them into one big story. And but that's the thing. You can visit any place that, even if it was not, like you said, no longer active or viable, or
right.
And it maybe even got changed. Maybe it had been like a county jail and it got turned into a bed and breakfast or whatever.
Right.
The energy's there. Well, think about it. There's some people, we're going to sleep in lockup tonight. I'm like, I'm not going to pay $300 for that. I can just drinking downtown with my shirt off, and they'll gladly put you up in there for free, or at least until the judge sees you. But
if you can hear me, you're not coming in at all. Not even badly.
Not even badly. That's no good.
That's good. No, and the reason why I brought this up is, I mean, I've been doing paranormal investigations for a long time. And I remember one
Uh-huh.
time, I didn't do, it wasn't an investigation, it was a visit just to Moundsville, the one in West Virginia.
Hmm.
You know, and it was like, oh, and this was in the daytime. This was not like an investigation or anything like that. It was just a tour and they let you walk around. And the vibe there was totally different. I mean, yeah, it had like all these prisons. It has a, it's got its reputation. I mean, in the basement, they had like what they called a sugar shack, and like all these prisons that they became overcrowded and they didn't have enough guards to supervise the prisoners. And they even had parts of the prison that down there that even the guards didn't go down there. And I mean, but besides that, I walked around and it was like, man, it was a different vibe altogether. It was like, and I'm not talking a specific sighting of, it was just, what's that thing about if walls could speak? It was like, oh man, this in here is like, wow. It was like, and it was, like I said, I've been to other places that are supposedly haunted. Yeah, you'll get the ones that, you get the goosebumps or you'll get that shiver or, something's up. But it was from end to end when I walked through that prison in Moundsville. I was like, oh, this place is like, wow. And I was thinking, man, I'd hate to, well, not I'd hate, but I probably would do it if I was put up to it. But I was thinking, I can imagine what this place must be at night. It's like, yeah.
Oh, 800%. Everything is, it's not even, I don't think it's amplified. Short of maybe it being a stormy night, because I think the electrical energy gives more juice for whatever's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you could be at a football field in the daytime with a little flashlight, flicking it on the one side, you're not going to see it.
Right.
Turn all the lights out, then yeah, you'll see it pretty well. So the less you have occupying your mind at any given time opens you up for visitations or whatever it is. Again, I never say that this or that are a spirit or whatever, because I don't know. But I definitely know it's definitely some sort of energy.
Sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah. No, it's like something that, like I said, I don't know if it's because, it has to, I'm sure it does. What am I talking about? The nature of who was there, who lived there, maybe for a few years or for a lifetime. And of course, if they had like in Moundsville, they did executions there. And I was built, post Civil War, and they first they hung people. They had like an enclosed gallows, and then they had, as a matter of fact, they had on display the electric chair. But yeah, overall, it was just, and it was like there's no escaping it. Whether it's an intelligent haunting or residual, like we were talking about. Oh, the smell of coffee. Over there, it's the smell of, I don't want to say whether it's a sphere or predators or just the way that life was lived within those walls. And it's like, it's a whole different experience.
There's a desolation. You ever heard somebody say, oh, I can smell fear on you? There's a pheromone that you put off that's soury smelling.
Yes.
I've smelled it on myself in situations.
Yeah.
It's palatable. And that's one of those things, like in a war situation or
And I'm sure you could speak to this, that if you're a predator on the outside world, more than likely you might still be a predator once you're in prison. It's like, it depends what size fish you are in that pond.
haunted hospital, go to a site of a rape or whatever. They all have that weird, this isn't, this is not wholesome.
Right.
Whatever, something really unwholesome happened here.
Yes. Weird, because sometimes you'll go to places, when I say places like land or some place that you don't see a building or you don't see anything as to use as far as a reference point. And you just get, like you said, this feeling like, man, this is not a good place. And later on, if you do a little bit of research, you find, well, there something happened or some structure was there or something took place. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a battleground. It just could just be something that maybe by the time you got there, the building that was there was torn down. but it leaves even an imprint, even if the structure's gone. How's that? You
Oh
still
yeah, it's
feel it.
100%. Yeah, yeah. That's why, like, where there's been, like, I forgot it was a goodness. It was like I'm using the wrong word for it, rectory.
Yes.
And there was a place where they had a spiral staircase, and you could still see what looked like some sort of, like, monk trying to go up in the middle of a room. The floor isn't even there.
Yes.
Or you'll see people that walk and you only see, like, from their hips down. That's because the floor
It was at a
was
different
lifted
level.
years later. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, you hear of sightings like that. Well, they'll say, "Well, I saw it go through the wall," and it's like, yeah, because maybe there was something else there before.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. People talk about, well, ghosts are going through the walls. Maybe the walls weren't there when the ghosts were there.
Yeah, yeah. Or yeah, you hear about that all the time. Like they'd seem at either usually it's a lower level as far as when they see them. Things are changed as far as floor level. Windows are blocked up, or doors, or things are remade into different things. As a matter of fact, I've even heard of people in really older houses finding rooms that are hidden rooms. I mean, not that they were hidden to begin with, but for somewhere along the line they were walled up, and they can't, following a
Almost like,
ghost. They realize, they start exploring, and they realize there's a room back there.
right. Well, almost like old coal rooms. They used to have those for, people would dump coal into an area to be shoveled into a big furnace.
Right.
And as people move away from that, they no longer needed those rooms.
Yes.
And sometimes people would just wall them up. That was pretty common.
Yep. Yep. Stuff like that. But I've heard of people that they kept having this sighting of a ghost, like almost going in, like, let's say, like through the wall or something, like always going in that one direction. And eventually it led them to discovering that there was actually a room back there. Because if they they bricked it or wallpapered it or whatever they did, they didn't ever realize that there was either a cubbyhole or an actual room in that part of the house, or things of that nature.
Right.
It's like,
And
go ahead.
well, sometimes what will happen is, I had lived in an older home, and there was apparently the house was moved down, like from like further back, closer to the main highway.
Right.
And because of sometimes you would get light. It would feel like you're getting light. The sun doesn't go that way; it goes the opposite way. But before they moved it, it was facing that way. I did research on it. It was like, that's strange that you would get the sensations of, heat or light as you pass an area where there's not, because it was sort of wonky. Because, like you said, if you build south-facing houses, which most people did, especially for their windows, then you move it. Of course, I don't know. Is there such a thing as
That's
residual ambient heat?
That's interesting.
I mean, you've heard of people hearing waterfalls and battling brooks. Maybe they had a well or something, or the house had been where there was a well. There's no longer a well there, but you're still having the experiences of hearing that.
Right. Exactly. If at some point, because sometimes structures are put, and then, like you said, they have a brook or a creek or something, and then it's dammed up or diverted along the lines. But for some reason, like you have, for lack of a better, an audible haunting where it's picking up what was there maybe 50 years before. So, but that thing about the light, that's very interesting as far as the house being moved.
Well, I knew there had to be a reason for it, because I try to, troubleshoot whatever. Is there maybe unshielded lines in the wall? Mm-hmm. Just something that might cause some sort of reaction that maybe is. You always hear that they're bringing batteries and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right.
Okay. Now, here's the thing. We can talk about the soul all you want. But I kind of lean more toward the old Egyptian belief that there's a spirit, there's a body, and there's like an energy, the ether or whatever, the
Right.
corporeal something that drives the body. It houses the soul, but you have to have energy to drive the body.
Right.
The human body is electrical impulse. So if ghosts themselves aren't willfully trying to screw with electronics, if it's that element that they had in the body that they just carried on with them. And maybe that's why we can occasionally see them if they tap in on whatever electrical frequency our bodies are putting off. That's why I think some people see spirits or whatever, and other people just never have experience.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's really weird because, then you get into things where, like you said, the weather, the atmospheric conditions, the placement, like you said, if there's water that runs under the house. A lot of those things, for some reason, can generate, how's that? A higher visibility of paranormal occurrences.
I've wondered if people that deal with ESP are people who have dealt with. All right, are you familiar with spontaneous human combustion?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Not everybody's died from that. Just like most people get hit by a lightning strike,
Yes.
they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some people who survive and, in fact, have more hits.
Yeah, no,
I
they become
wonder-
like a magnet, a lightning magnet.
They straight up are like a lightning rod. But I wonder if people who have had those sort of experiences with spontaneous human combustion, have a tendency, like did they see spirits coming to that? Was there almost like a what they call an aura that a person with epilepsy
Right.
sometimes get, where they go, oh, I'm going to have a seizure, I need to sit down because
Yes.
I'm seeing orbs around lights and things like that.
Yes, that they have something that's announcing itself.
Yeah. I just wonder, I don't know if they ever did research on that or not, but it's interesting.
Well-
and I also wondered, I have a friend who's a twin,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder the frequency of if they have any paranormal experiences. Does your twin also, or is there one that's like the negative and the positive, one picked it up, one doesn't pick it up?
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder. It's again, that's how my mind operates.
There's a theory where they say, not everybody, but many people that have a higher, you want to call it psychic ability, and I'm not talking here medium as far as channeling. They sometimes come either through their personality or because of their experiences early in life, they become hypervigilant. All right.
Yes.
And
Been
these
there,
people
yeah.
tend to be more psychically aware than other people, because, like I said, it could be just you're high strung, you were born that way, or maybe you were in a setting, especially as a kid, as you grow up, that you become hypervigilant. It becomes second nature to you, and you catch on for some reason. You see things, just pick up on stuff, and it just becomes second nature. Whether you hardwire it into your brain, the plasticity of the brain, however it happens. Where you, like you said, you sense things, whether you want to call it precognition, or the people that actually see things, whether it's a shadow or even a full body apparition, or, the people that have that feeling like, hey, something is about to happen, whatever. Hypervigilance is tied into a lot of that. Certain personality styles have that ability. That they just, for some reason, that's why they can, like you said, nobody's seeing it, but they see it, or they're aware of it. I've heard, even in, let's say in hospitals where, they all have elderly patients, or it's a part of the hospital where they have people that are very, very ill, and you'll have certain nurses which know when they're going to lose a patient, even if that patient is not necessarily about, that there's nothing there to think, oh, any minute now. and they know ahead of time which are going to be the ones that might pass away.
Right.
They just know it.
Yeah. Well, think about it like this. Say if you're a hunter. Okay, let's say this. Maybe not a hunter, but that would work. Let's say I know people who forage morel mushrooms.
All right.
Very specific type of mushroom. They know the layout. They know the type of trees they went under. It's like, again, muscle memory. They've trained themselves to, they don't have to think about it. It's the same thing with, working in situations. I can generally tell when something's going to pop off. Again, it's not a physical smell. I've always talked about something not smelling right, or my gut's telling me this isn't right.
Right.
But there's a palatable something there.
Mm-hmm.
And you hope it's wrong, but a lot of times it's not. And it's saved my life several times.
Yes, right. And sometimes there's no logic behind it. If you try to logic it, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it's not. Sometimes it's a non-quantifiable thing. It's the X factor, and that's what makes science, look at stuff sideways. But again, 100 years ago, most of science was fanciful stuff, if not witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
To me, things in the paranormal are just things we've not discovered yet. 200 years ago, if you had, cancer or something, it's like, oh, well, you have bad blood, you have ghosts in your blood or something like that.
Right.
Which is, somebody say that as a joke or something now, and they're like, what are you talking about? But that was a real thing. And people don't understand, if you are, whatever situation you're in, like you had talked earlier, where you say, well, you have to look at the time things happen, the mindset of things, and what is known as, conventional wisdom, right?
Right.
Common knowledge sometimes is like, well, of course, you have to bleed somebody if they're sick, that's, got to put leeches on them. Come on now. Everybody knows that.
Right.
But then, like you said, as time goes on and you develop better methods, you get away from that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, and you know what? Let's say the thing about sicknesses or what, then you get into, that people are cursed, bloodlines are cursed, or, even that treadmill of, where people were accused of witches when people got sick or animals got sick. And it's almost, and then, like you were saying, the self-fulfilling prophecy, as far as like, somebody curses you, but it only works if you know about the curse kind of deal, and all of a sudden you develop, let's say, the symptoms or things of this nature because you believe in it. When in reality, maybe
Right.
that didn't have any mojo. How's that? But you took care of the mojo part because you believed it, and then you develop symptoms. I've heard of that, of people like believing in that kind of thing, or the evil eye or stuff like that.
Right. And you can have like causality.
Mm-hmm.
To where people go, well, obviously, whenever the birds come in, that's a bad sign, and your crops are going to be bad. It's a sign that the crops are going to be bad. No, maybe the birds are eating the crops.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, there's that.
Oh, it's in those cases, some of these stories are it's a question of people observing nature more closely than we normally do, or in some cases interpreting things. And let's face it, 9 times out of 10, in those settings, people are always looking for the adverse outcome. A sign. The signs or omens are usually on the downside. Why? Because everybody's thinking, I need to be prepared. Yeah, the sunset was red. So there was a saying for sailors. What was it?
Right.
That if what color the sunset, sailors delight. I can't. In other words, people were always looking for the portents, whether it's in nature or the birds or the cow or the cow, what was it, the soured milk, because everybody was afraid of, and I imagine especially if your livelihood depended on it, the downside.
Right. Well, again, superstition.
Yes.
People banked on stuff. There's a lot of stuff in Farmer's Almanac, which is straight up, but I don't know if you've ever seen a person like a farmer. I've seen this with old people. Like, if you've ever seen somebody do this, your joints are probably hurting. They'll pick up some dirt and they'll kind of smell it. You go, yeah, it's going to rain soon. Something happens, the barometric pressure changes.
Yes.
And earth smells sweeter when it's going to rain. I don't know what that is. I've just seen it myself. I can't explain it. I'm sure there's some logic behind it. But just like witching for water and these different little things, it's happened enough to say that I don't think it's all just hogwash.
No.
The further I get into stuff, I come into investigating more or less just a curious kid. And then I kind of got into, I need to handle things a certain way in scientific method and DDD, and that's great. But then there's also that unknown variable that you've got to take into consideration, because if not, you're not taking in the totality of all the evidence.
Of course. And you know what? Sometimes, yes, I believe in science, but there's sometimes certain things that just cannot be explained by science. If you try to bottle it, if you try to put a model and say, I can reproduce this, let's say under laboratory settings, there's just no way. But that doesn't mean it's not valid. It's just that we just don't understand it. All right. So, some things are like, okay, you're making stuff up, or superstition or things of that nature. But there's other times it's just because we don't understand it. Especially maybe from a time where there wasn't, how can I say, scientific gadgets around that you could whip out and say, well, I'm going to measure this and find out what's going on here. Things like that.
Yeah.
In other words, some superstition was just that superstition, and some had some basis in reality. And again, I want to say that always, I think human nature is, we're always worried about the adverse, whatever it is, because I think that's just part of who we are. If this happens, that other thing's going to happen. But yeah, something along those lines. Let me ask you, are you working on any other books right now or anything that's going to be coming out soon?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm working on a book about reincarnation and near-death experiences. I'm working on a book that touches, because like I said, I just had put out the demon possession book. Yes. So I want to counter the energy of that. So I'm writing a book about angelic encounters are different. Like, you always had some story, somebody starting to step off of a curb in Chicago, and somebody said, "Hey, buddy, look out!" Or something grabbed them. They, buzz shot past them. They looked around. There's not a soul around them.
Right.
Those kind of stories, uplifting stories.
Something pulled them back.
Something pulled them back. Something was looking out for them. Working on a book about Viking, Celtic, and Nordic style undead and different types of creatures and night creatures that might, like origins of vampires in different cultures. Sure. Just like, in China, they have different types of vampires and different creatures. Sure. But depending on the area that it's at, they have different components. But I'm working on that. I'm working on, I'm blanking right now.
You're busy.
I got about 10 books still in the hopper that I'm working on.
Oh my God. All right.
I'll tell you.
What's the last thing you said?
Like I said, was the Viking stories.
Okay.
About the Viking undead. What did I say? Near-death experiences and reincarnation. Yes. I want to touch on some like ESP related remote viewing stuff, which I'm actually studying remote viewing right now.
Okay.
It's quirky. it's quirky, and I don't know how much of it is I'm picking up things from people,
Right.
just from general conversation or getting a feel of them. But some of the tests I've done has yielded good results. So I don't know, and if I can actually
That's a very
figure out how to
interesting
do that.
field.
Well, it's sort of it's research in what I'm saying. Like, I'm learning on the job with it. And if it turns out interesting, I want to be able to maybe write something that touches on, oh, here's what I found about this. Is it BS or is it not BS? You know, try to
Exactly. From a
disprove.
first-hand perspective. These are my experiences
Exactly.
in this. Yes,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
absolutely. All right, Steve, for my podcast listeners, where can they find you at?
If they go to steveasher.studio.com, that has like my podcast, House of Asher. It's got, different interviews. It's got all my books. If I've got any appearances coming up, usually this time of year, getting into October, that's when it bumps up because everybody likes creepy stories.
Yeah.
But go there or just Google Stevie Asher and you'll see
Is
my
it
beautiful
like
smiling face.
Steve Asher, like and .studio.com, you said?
It's steveasher.studio.com.
Okay. All right. I'll put a link in the credits of the show to that website, but that's for my podcast listeners. I want to
Cool.
thank you so much, Steve. It has been wonderful to speak to you again, and I'll be keeping an eye on what you put out as far as new books.
Right on.
Okay.
When I get some more stuff up and going, I'll send you some links to all that.
Yes, absolutely. Till next time.
Yes, ma'am.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, there we go. And I apologize. You know what? Steve had explained to me that he moved out to this very rural area in Kentucky. And like in all these places, the internet gets kind of wonky. It comes and goes. So I understand. Been there, done that. But I apologize if some of the transmission got like unintelligible. How's that? But anyway, I hope you like this interview with Steve. I've spoken to Steve. This is like my 4th interview with him, and he's, he has written those books, which by the way are really well written as far as interesting. And again, he was a corrections officer, which is why I was asking him. When you're again, he was in a maximum security, which the reason why I asked him is that, I guess the more dangerous you are as an inmate, the tighter the prison or the security for the prison that you're housed in has to be. What vibes you get off these people, because, I'm sure there's people in there that never killed anybody. They're just in there because maybe they were a habitual offender. They kept robbing places or, of course, drug dealing. But how can I tell you? I think that the reason why I also, when I was making that comparison to when I was in Moundsville, that there's a lot of people there that something dark walked with them and have been walking with them for quite a long time. And I think that's why you get that vibe. Even when you go like to a place that's empty, it's like nobody's there. But it's. And let me tell you, by the way, I went into all the cells, which, by the way, you look at them, they're like this small. And you saw a lot of, I want to say demons. They would scratch it on the walls of the things. Really, like, if you want to call it Satanism or devil worship or like really they weren't into, like, how can I say that? I saw scratches on some of the walls. It wasn't like convoluted, weird occult symbology. It was like kind of basic stuff. But and you could say, well, maybe there was BSing. Maybe, or maybe it was just whatever. But that absolutely the feel I got was this was not a couple of people that were walking around here that were influenced by something dark. There was a bunch of them in there. And that's why you also get these hauntings of people that have gone to do investigations at prisons where they encounter very dark, malevolent apparitions, including non-humans, because I think that they kind of like hang out there. It's like, these are the waters I swim in. And that's why you'll have people sometimes that have some really, what's the word? Scary encounters. Even seasoned ghost hunters will tell you that going to prisons and or, the old asylums, the ones that were built post-Civil War, where people many times live their entire lives. There's a feeling about there that something dark is still lurking there, right? And like I said, some of these places were shut down after maybe even 100 years or more that they were open. Like how many people lived there, died there, things of that nature. And let's face it, most of these people, their background sometimes, even prior to being institutionalized or going to prison, they didn't have the best life. And as a matter of fact, there was a good portion of the time that nobody would claim the bodies. If, and this is a big if, even if the authorities, whoever ran the place, knew how to get a hold of the family, nobody would claim them. They weren't in, it was like, no, dispose of the body. And some people could say, well, economic reasons, but not all the times. In some cases you were able to go ahead and dispose of the body. But I want to say that, especially when it came to prison things, like if you had that, it's almost like the family, how's this, once the distance, it's almost like something's catching, like, and who knows, sometimes this family member, they were aware that they were dark even before they were getting in trouble and ended up, being arrested and going to jail. Like they were aware this is this is not beyond the black sheep. This is the dark one in the family. And it's almost like this. Let's face it. If you have somebody, and I'm not talking here anybody famous or anybody that the newspaper is going to write up. I'm talking about because believe me, there was plenty of very bad people. Let's say, and we're talking here the prison setting. That they never, maybe they might have made the papers a little bit, but then afterwards, I'll give you, nobody cared if the family would have come and claimed the bodies. What I'm saying, it would have made the newspaper. They could have done it, for lack of a better word, anonymously, and they still didn't. The reason being, it's almost like they feared, even if economically they could have done it, almost like they feared that what it was about that person, that they would bring it back to the family. All right. But sometimes there's notoriety, like for example, Al Capone, when he died, as a matter of fact, he died in Miami on Palm Island. But his family was originally from Chicago, and the family got buried. They shipped his body up to, but he had so much notoriety, even back then, he died in 1947, that they had to rebury him in another cemetery. Like in other words, what they did was, there was so much going on with Al Capone that they left his original marker in the original cemetery, and then they moved him to another cemetery because of the notoriety and how many people were coming to the grave in this whole, all right? And remember, he got sent to prison in 1930, I believe. There was the tax evasion thing. And he got an 11-year sentence, and he got out a little bit earlier because by that time he was, he had syphilis, very advanced case of syphilis, which it sounds like when you read it that he contracted this when he was even a teenager, very young. And he got out a little bit earlier because his wife petitioned, because his health had deteriorated. And then he lived, I think, the last 5 or 6 years of his life over in this mansion that he had here in Miami Beach called Palm Island. My point being that by the time he died, he had been out of the limelight for years and years. Okay? He was not the mob boss who ordered the Valentine's Day massacre. No, that was it. That was in the rearview mirror. All right? None of that. And even then, the notoriety. But my point being that there was a lot of people that nobody would have cared if the family told the prison, hey, you're whatever, so and so is dead, he just died. That they would even bother, because there was something about that person that the family knew, like, we don't even want him, even dead, we don't want him here close to us. Getting back to my original point, that when you go to some of these places, like these prisons, you feel like the I don't want to say negativity, because that sounds so, it's like something really dark was still there, that was pervasive. And it's obvious, of course, like I said, yeah, not everybody was a murderer, but nobody was there because they were good people. Yeah, probably there were some people that ended up there but wrongly, sure. But the overall majority were there because they had done some, especially when we're talking the harsher type of, how can I call it? As a matter of fact, Capone, he had, by the time he even after he went to prison initially, that he got stabbed by another inmate, that's when they transferred him over to Alcatraz. Alcatraz had just opened in the early 30s, and that's when he spent some time. And it's really funny because prior to this, and I don't know if anybody's seen it, they oh my God, was it in Chicago? There was a picture of his, he had gone to jail for a short amount of time, of his cell. It was beautiful. He had an easy chair. It was decorated. And then they showed his cell in Alcatraz. What a difference. Big, big difference. Right? And of course, because he had lost his mojo. As a matter of fact, they say that he even had another prisoner there that was like a small-time hood kind of guy. Like, was his protector because he was getting bullied. Hard to believe that, Al Capone, the guy that, yeah. But, yeah, there's places that, and, you experience it, I'm sure, firsthand. What he was saying where, if you can go into do this job and you think that you've got it and nothing to worry about and it's under control, is like he says, the day you need to put in your badge, because there's people in there, whether because they're evil, because I think based on what I've seen, some of them have some type of behavior or mental illness, even though nowadays I know that in prison they get medicated. In other words, if they're diagnosed with something, they do offer them treatment. But still, there's people that, what's the word I'm looking for? They're bad. They're just bad people. Let's not even give them the escape hatch of mental illness or something. They're just bad people. And just because they're behind bars, that doesn't mean they stop being bad. It's like, oh, I was bad, but now I'm not. I mean, they could say they are. They could say, oh, I found Jesus. I'm yeah, of course. Lying comes second nature to them. And I think that those types of personalities, because you have to realize, because you're thinking, okay, well, whatever it is that they did bad was on the outside world, and now they're here in prison, whatever, doing their time. First of all, there's a lot of bad things that happen in prisons. That's number one. Number two, when you've got that type of personality or that mindset and you've got time on your hands, there's a lot of machinations that prisoners will do about what they would do, bad things sometimes. Some of them are only thinking, man, when I get out of here, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to have a drink, and I'm going to have juice, and blah, blah, blah. They're thinking, but there's others, especially the darker ones, which, yeah, they might think but they're really, what catches them up is what are the dark things they're going to do to other people. I mean, or this, like, if I got out, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And they're not pleasant things. My point being that just because they don't actually do it or execute it, because obviously they're in prison, when people obsess on something, this is what they think about. This is what they really think about. And they even come, they start even working on the details. That puts out a type of vibe that, for lack of a better word, will stain a place. And some people say, well, how's this? You know how even now, they'll have, certain houses where maybe a serial killer used to live and things of this nature. And the house, sometimes nobody wants to live there. Or sometimes even gets torn down. Because there's people understand on some level that and I'm not talking here whether that the actual crime took place there. Maybe the person committed crimes some other place, but this is where they lived. We all understand that where people think of this, plan it, figure it out, whatever you want to call it, feel it, I need to go kill somebody, whatever. They know that there's something that stains that place. And that's why it either becomes, people can't occupy it, or it just, nobody wants to live there. Things of that nature. Like, we recognize on some level that even when that person is not there anymore, whether they left or they're dead, that part of them is there. The gross part. How's that? Whatever. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked the show with Steve. I think he's really fascinating. And again, I apologize for the bad audio sometimes. But I'm hoping to bring him back again. I'm going to put a link to his website on the credits of the show. Do not forget to look me up on Substack. Go to mppellicer.com and you're going to have a link there. That's my personal page, or miamighostchronicles.com. You can find links to Substack from there. You also find links to all the shows, whether it's Stories of the Supernatural, Nightshade Diary, Supernatural Storytime, Eerie News. You're going to find links there to either the video version or the podcast version. Again, I'm in all the different podcast platforms. Same thing. You look up Stories of the or MP Pellicer. You can find me either way, the name of the show or me, because I'm the common denominator in all these shows. Or you could find me besides YouTube. You could find me on Rumble, Cloud Hub, BitChute, any place that I can put up my content. I try to put up my content. The only good thing that I can say as far as if you go to my website is my links there are commercial free. All right. You can listen to stuff without commercial interruptions. And if it's the podcast version, you can either listen to it real time on the browser, or you can have the option if you want to download the MP3 if you want to listen to it later, whatever the case might be. So yeah, and I've got a lot of great guests coming on, a lot of fantastic guests, and I want to thank you for coming back, spending this time with me. So, till next time, take care.